Hello and welcome back. I hope you're having a great day. Today I wanted to talk about some Australian novels. Australians seem to have a very complicated relationship with our own fiction and even just our own creative industries. Australian films never do well at the box office in Australia. In fact, the only time they do well here is if they become successful overseas, and the official name is the culture cringe, and we suffer from it greatly in Australia. We just have this strange idea that everything from Britain and America is going to be great, and anything we make ourselves is always going to be substandard. I think for people who are in the book scene in Australia, so people who are involved in publishing or reviewing books, will be well versed in Australian novels, and there are a few that really break through and do well, but for the most part, if you were just a casual browser looking for a book in a bookshop, it's unlikely that you would come across an Australian one on display. They're much more likely to be a British or an American bestseller. And I think this is incredibly sad. I mean, for me growing up, I had little to no representation of real Australia on TV and in books. The main way that we seem to view ourselves is through reality TV, like cooking shows and DIY shows. So I thought I'd put together a little starter pack for anyone interested in Australian fiction and talk about 5 books that I think are really great examples of Australian fiction and how amazing it can be. First up on my list is The Messenger by Marcus Zusak. So before there was The Book Thief, there was The Messenger. For some reason in America it was released as I Am the Messenger. No idea why. I think to give you a summary, I'll just read the back of the book because I'm really bad at giving summaries of books, and I read this quite a while ago, so. Ed Kennedy, cab driving prodigy, pathetic card player, useless at sex, shares coffee with his dog and is in nervous love with Audrey. His life is one of suburban routine and incompetence until he inadvertently stops at a bank robbery. That's when the first ace turns up and Ed becomes the messenger. Protect the diamonds, survive the clubs, dig deep through spades, feel the hearts. Chosen to care, he travels through town, helping and hurting until one question remains: where are the messages coming from? So yeah, this guy Ed, he mysteriously receives cards from like a pack of playing cards, and they have messages written on them, and he figures out that the messages relate to people in his town and that he has to help each one of those people. This is very different from The Book Thief. It's written in first person from the point of view of Ed, so it is got that very laconic 19-year-old like Aussie kid kind of style. Firstly, the story is really great. The mystery of why he's receiving these cards is really intriguing. It was one of those books where you're just like, I need to know what happens next. I really liked how it was very distinctly Australian. I think you could tell it was set in Sydney and like traditional laconic Australian sort of style really shone through, but it wasn't a stereotype. It was really like he was just writing from his own experiences of living in Sydney. If you've read The Book Thief, you know what an amazing writer Marcus Zusak is, and this definitely remains true for this book as well. Next on my list is one of my childhood favourite authors, Klein. So I have some of her books here at home. I'm pretty sure I have all of them, most of them, bought from various like library discard sales and secondhand bookstores, because literally only this year have her books began to be republished, which is a crime. This one is the only one that's remained fully in publication since it was published, I think. So it's Hating Alison Ashley. This is one that people read at school a lot, I think, in primary school, and there was a film made of it starring Delta Goodrem. Quite different from the book. So Klein wrote a mix of sort of young adult children's. This was first published in 1984, so she was writing in like 70s, 80s, 90s. So I guess there wasn't that huge definition of like young adult and kids as there is today. So definitely I think her books can be read by all ages, and obviously I still love them as a 23-year-old. So her books range from being like kind of creepy horror stories to about everyday school life for children to like family drama type stuff. So as a kid, having this huge range of female heroines to read from, who all had these experiences of sort of living in Australian suburbs, that was incredibly, I guess, just like important to me, because I was like, finally, here are some characters I can like genuinely relate to, or having experiences that are similar to mine, or something that I can really understand and see as being real. So my very favourite books that she's written is this series. So the first one is All in the Blue, Unclouded Weather. So these, I believe, are based off her childhood growing up in the late 40s. So that's when these are set, and it's about these it's about four sisters, but we only really hear from three of them. So the older sister doesn't really get a point of view, but the three younger sisters, Heather, I think she's about 14, Kathy is about 12, and Vivian is about 10, and they each get chapters from their point of view. Part of the reason why I love these books is because all the sisters have red hair, and I really connected with that. They live in a country town in New South Wales, and it's kind of just about their lives growing up, and because it's set in the 40s, it does have this sort of beautiful vintage quality to it. Third on my list is Jasper Jones by Craig Silvey. So this is about a boy called Charlie Buckton who's living in a WA mining town out in the country in the 60s, 1965. So one night he's sleeping in his bedroom, and a boy called Jasper Jones, who is an Aboriginal Australian, and he knocks on Charlie's window and begs him for help. So this is by a WA author, and it's been one of those rare massive hits in Australia. There's been a play made of it, which I got the opportunity to see. It was so good. And there's now a film coming out with like so many famous Australian people. There's like Toni Collette and Hugo Weaving, and Angora Rice from The Nice Guys. It's like a YA sort of crime mystery type thing, but it also features a lot of themes, so it talks a lot about racism. And then Charlie's best friend is Vietnamese, so there's a lot of discussion about the Vietnam War. And then he's also in love with this girl called Eliza, and so there is a lot of discussion about how females were treated in the 60s. So it packs a lot in. In some ways I think that's the book's downfall a little bit. It does try too hard to get too many themes in, while at the same time creating this sort of like coming of age young adult story. But apart from trying to pack too much in, it's a really great book. I would recommend reading this before you see the film, because I think part of the joy of reading it is finding out what happens, and it's definitely not what you expect. Fourth on my list is Cloudstreet by Tim Winton. This is probably Australia's most famous novel. He is also a WA author, and this is his most famous book. This book I enjoyed sort of against odds, because I don't generally like poetic style writing. It kind of just annoys me, and I kind of just want the author to get to the point. And this is incredibly like poetic writing. It describes almost everything in an incredibly abstract way and kind of goes in long roundabout ways to get to the point. Somehow I still enjoyed it. I think it is because it has a huge cast of characters, and they are all quite iconic characters. So this is about two families, the Pickles and the Lambs, and through various circumstances they happen to live together in the same house. So it's like a massive old house, and like they each get half of it, and they live in this house in Perth, just after World War II again. I think it's the late 40s. I think the reason I really like this book was it was the first book I ever read that was set in my own hometown, and it offers a really interesting snapshot of my own city in that era. The characters are all really memorable, and they provide sort of representations of different classes that existed or still exist really in Australia. It's really interesting to talk about class in regards to Australia, because we have this strange view that we are a classless society, purely because we were populated in terms of white people by convicts mostly, and working class people who wanted to work the land. But that's not true at all. We most definitely have class here, and this book really portrays how the sort of class system really affects different people in different ways, how they have all these aspirations that will never be realized because of their upbringing. And yeah, it's really cool. It's really interesting. It's massive, but I know a lot of people like poetic writing anyway, so if you are one of those people, I think you'd definitely enjoy it. The writing is, like, when I stopped being annoyed by it, it is really beautiful. So the last book on my list is called The Women in Black by Madeleine St. John. The title kind of sounds like it's a horror story, but it's actually a kind of domestic drama set in Sydney in around the 1950s or 60s. And the women in black refer to women who work in a department store in Sydney. They work in the cocktail dress section, and their uniform as part of their job is to wear black dresses. It's a pretty slim novel. It's set just over a period around Christmas, so it starts in sort of early December and ends just after New Year's Eve. And one of the reasons I love this book is because it described an Australian Christmas. It's so frustrating as an Australian to be surrounded by all this wintry Christmas stuff, and it is 30+ degrees outside, and so it was really great to read just about a hot Christmas. So each character gets point of view chapters, so you do find out about the lives of all of the women working in the cocktail section of the department store. I also really liked it because it was just kind of a really nice like domestic drama about Australians in that era. Some of it was a little old-fashioned in its views, but in some ways it was immensely progressive, so I just think it's a really good book. It's a really easy read, it's really fun. So that is 5 of some of my favourite Australian novels. I hope this video can encourage you to pick up one of them, or any Australian novel. They are great, they really are, I promise. If you have any recommendations for Australian novels, please let me know in the comments. I am always very keen to discover new Australian authors to read. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. See ya!